The kitchen knife my son gifted me for Christmas sits unused in my drawer. Jessica told him I didn't need more clutter in my outdated country kitchen. That knife was the first thing she took from me. My son would be the last. For 40 years, I tended to the same farmhouse where I raised my Luke. The soil knew my hands, the walls held my laughter, and every corner whispered memories of my late husband. Then Luke brought home Jessica from the city, all designer clothes and polished smiles. She seemed sweet at first, complimenting my homemade apple pie and asking about family recipes. I wanted to believe my son had found someone who would honor our simple ways. "This place has such character," she'd said, running manicured fingers along my hand-carved table. "We could really transform it with the right touch." I smiled, not understanding the danger in her words. Transform. As if generations of love weren't enough. When they announced they were getting married, I crocheted a blanket with our family pattern, the same one my mother-in-law made for me. Jessica accepted it with a tight smile, later telling Luke it was too rustic for their modern apartment. He defended me then. It wouldn't last. After the wedding, Luke suggested they move to the farmhouse. "To help take care of you, Mom," he said. I should have recognized the concern in his eyes. Wasn't for me. Jessica had planted the first seed. I was becoming a burden, too old to manage alone. They moved in during spring. I tried making room, shifting my life to accommodate hers. I gave them the master bedroom, moved my things to the smaller guest room, and watched as Jessica began rearranging furniture, replacing family photos with abstract art, and discussing renovation plans as if I wasn't there. "We should open up this wall," she'd tell Luke, pointing to the hallway where I'd marked my son's growth with pencil lines. "It's so closed off and old-fashioned, like me." The day I found my recipe box reorganized, generations of handwritten cards sorted by Jessica's efficiency system, I felt the first real sting. When I mentioned it, her response was honey-coated poison. "I was just trying to help organize things, Agnes. I know how forgetful you've been lately." Forgetful, a word she'd use increasingly, planting doubts in my son's mind about my competence. That night, I heard them talking in hushed voices about next steps and arrangements and what's best for Mom. I stood silent in the hallway, my heart breaking as my son's voice grew distant, replaced by her carefully crafted concern. I just didn't realize then how methodically she was dismantling my life, piece by cherished piece. The first warning sign came when my garden tools disappeared from the shed. "I put them somewhere safer," Jessica said. "Wouldn't want you hurting yourself out there alone." It wasn't about safety, it was about control. But this was only the beginning of her plan to erase me from my own home and from my son's heart. My neighbor Elaine noticed the change first. "Agnes, you're not coming to the Sunday potlucks anymore. Everything all right?" She peered past me, noticing the unfamiliar decor through the window. I made excuses about being tired, but Elaine wasn't fooled. "That city girl's changing more than just your curtains, isn't she?" she whispered. I couldn't admit the truth that Jessica had told Luke I was too embarrassing at social gatherings, forgetting people's names. Another lie, I remembered everyone, even their children's birthdays. But seed by poisonous seed, Jessica was planting doubt in everyone's minds. If you're feeling the injustice already, hit that like button and subscribe. You won't believe what this city woman does next to this innocent mother. I remember the day Luke was born like it was yesterday. 36 hours of labor, and the moment they placed him in my arms, I promised I would always protect him. Now, decades later, I found myself unable to protect him from the woman sleeping beside him, or myself from the growing void between us. After Jessica moved in, the farmhouse that once fit me like a well-worn glove began to feel foreign. My morning routine of making breakfast for Luke, something I'd done since he was tall enough to reach the table, was subtly undermined. "Luke and I are trying this new diet," Jessica would announce, pulling out protein powders and supplements. "All that bacon and those heavy farm breakfasts aren't good for his cholesterol." She'd place a hand on his shoulder, her diamond ring catching the morning light. "We need to take care of his heart, his heart." The irony wasn't lost on me. The kitchen, my domain for 4 decades, slowly transformed. My cast iron skillets disappeared from their hooks, replaced by non-stick pans with names I couldn't pronounce. My herb garden was deemed messy and replaced with store-bought alternatives in matching glass jars. "It just looks cleaner this way," Jessica explained with that practiced patience, as if speaking to a child. and we know exactly what we're getting. What we were getting. As if my carefully tended herbs might poison us all. I retreated to smaller spaces. My knitting basket moved from the living room to my bedroom after Jessica mentioned how the yarn collected dust. My favorite chair by the window, where I'd watched countless sunsets, was replaced by a sleek modern piece that hurt my back but tied the room together. Each night, I'd lie awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of my transformed home. The antique clock that had ticked faithfully since my wedding day was now in the attic, its sound too disruptive for Jessica's sleep. The creak of the third stair that announced Luke's arrival home every day was fixed without my knowledge, another piece of our shared history erased. I began feeling like a guest in my own home. Worse, an unwelcome one. "Mom, did you move Jessica's face cream again?" Luke asked one morning, his voice tinged with frustration. "No, I haven't touched her things," I replied, hurt that he would assume I'd do such a thing. "Well, it's missing, and you were the only one in that bathroom yesterday." Later, I found the cream exactly where it always was. Jessica never apologized for the confusion. Instead, she suggested to Luke that perhaps my memory was slipping. The small injuries accumulated. The family recipes I offered to teach her were declined with. I found a healthier version online. The stories I tried to share about Luke's childhood were interrupted with, "Oh, Luke's already told me all about that." Had he? I wondered what version of our life together now existed in his mind, filtered through Jessica's lens. My greatest fear wasn't losing my home or my possessions. It was losing my son. Each day, I felt him drifting further away, his eyes seeing me differently, his patience growing thinner. "Mom, why can't you just try to adapt a little?" he asked, after I expressed concern about Jessica repainting the kitchen without discussing it with me. This is Jessica's home too now. Too. Not instead of. But it was beginning to feel that way. One evening, I found a pamphlet on the kitchen counter, Caring for Parents with Early Onset Dementia. I was only 68, sharp as I'd ever been. When I confronted Jessica, she feigned innocent concern. "It's just good to be prepared, Agnes. My friend's mother started showing signs at your age." She patted my hand condescendingly. "Don't worry, we'll take care of you." That night, I heard her on the phone. She found the pamphlet. "I know, but Luke needs to start accepting reality. His mother isn't going to get better." The cruelty of her manufactured reality stole my breath. If you understand this mother's pain, show your support with a like and subscribe. The heartbreak only gets deeper from here. The first true betrayal came on an ordinary Tuesday. I'd been tending to the last of my garden, the small patch Jessica hadn't yet redesigned, when I overheard them on the porch. I wasn't eavesdropping, not intentionally, but the wind carried their voices to me as clearly as if they stood beside me. "I'm worried about your mom," Jessica said, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "She seems so resistant to change. And I found her wandering in the kitchen last night at 3 a.m. She didn't even seem to know what she was looking for." I froze, trowel in hand. This was a lie. I hadn't left my room the previous night. I'd taken to using a small water pitcher in my room to avoid nighttime encounters with Jessica. "Are you sure?" Luke asked, concern evident in his voice. "Yes, and it's not the first time. Remember how she accused me of moving her reading glasses? And last week, when she couldn't find her wallet and blamed the cleaning service? More lies, strung together with just enough truth to sound plausible. Yes, I had misplaced my glasses, but I never accused anyone. And the wallet incident? I'd simply asked if anyone had seen it before finding it in my other purse. "Maybe we should talk to Dr. Winters," my son replied, his voice heavy with worry. Mom's been under a lot of stress with all the changes. The changes she had orchestrated. The stress she had caused. Yet somehow I was the problem. I wanted to stand up, to walk over and defend myself, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Perhaps it was shock, or maybe the devastating realization that my son might actually believe these fabrications. That evening at dinner, Jessica was especially attentive, refilling my water glass before I asked, cutting my meat as if I couldn't manage it myself. "Is everything okay?" I asked, noticing the exchanged glances between her and Luke. "Everything's fine, Mom," Luke said too quickly. "Jessica was just telling me how she's concerned about you." "Oh," I kept my voice steady, though my hands trembled slightly. "I just noticed you seem a little confused sometimes," Jessica offered, reaching to pat my hand. "It's perfectly normal at your age." "At my age?" I was 68, not 98. I'm not confused, I said firmly. Of course not, she soothed, her eyes meeting Luke's in silent communication. We just want what's best for you. Later that week, I discovered Luke had scheduled me for a memory assessment with our family doctor. The betrayal cut deep, not that he was concerned, but that he had believed Jessica's lies without even asking me. When I confronted him privately, his defense was immediate. Jessica only mentioned it because she cares. Mom, she notices things I might miss. Like what? I challenged. Like how you put the milk in the pantry last week instead of the fridge. I hadn't done that. Not once in my life had I made such a mistake. But I could see in his eyes that he believed I had. That night, I went to the bathroom and found my prescription medication bottle open on the counter. I always kept it in my bedside drawer, closed tightly. Someone had moved it, opened it. As I stared at the scattered pills, a chill ran down my spine. Was she tampering with my medication, planting evidence of my confusion? The thought seemed paranoid, even to me. But then I remembered the lies, the convenient incidents that I had no memory of. For the first time in my life, I felt afraid in my own home. Not of physical harm, but of something perhaps more insidious. The systematic dismantling of my son's trust in me. I started keeping a journal, hiding it inside an old family Bible Jessica wouldn't touch. Tuesday, pills moved. Wednesday, Jessica told Luke I forgot to turn off the stove. I didn't use it today. I documented everything, creating a record of reality as it slipped away from me. One afternoon, I caught Jessica in my room, rifling through my dresser drawers. She jumped when she saw me. Just looking for that brooch you wanted me to wear, she said smoothly. I'd never offered her any jewelry. Later, my pearl necklace, a wedding gift from Luke's father, went missing. When I mentioned it, Jessica sighed. Agnes, you sold that last month, don't you remember? You wanted money for new gardening supplies. This story is just getting started. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see how this innocent mother-in-law fights back against these cruel manipulations. Silence became my constant companion. Not the peaceful quiet of solitude I once enjoyed on my porch, watching fireflies dance across the evening sky, but a heavy, isolating silence that grew thicker with each passing day. Luke and Jessica began having conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. Their voices would drop to whispers, heads bent close together, eyes darting my way with poorly concealed concern. I became a spectator in my own home, watching my relevance diminish with each secretive exchange. We were just discussing weekend plans, Jessica would say dismissively when I asked what they were talking about. But their expressions, guilty, pitying, told a different story. The doctor found nothing wrong with my memory or cognitive function. Fit as a fiddle for your age, Agnes, he'd announced, yet somehow the narrative of my decline continued in subtle ways. Jessica began helping me with tasks I'd managed perfectly well for decades. She'd take over bill payments, claiming, it's just easier if I handle this online. She'd answer questions directed at me during family phone calls, offering, Agnes has been a little tired lately. Tired, confused, forgetful. Words that painted me as diminished, creating a fiction that was becoming reality in my son's eyes. The physical distance grew alongside the emotional one. Luke stopped coming by my room to say goodnight, a ritual we'd maintained even after he moved back home. Our Sunday drives into town became less frequent, then ceased altogether. Jessica thought we might try that new brunch place instead, he'd say, not meeting my eyes. I wasn't invited. I found myself checking my phone more frequently, hoping for a text or call from the friends who used to visit. But they came less often now. Jessica's redesign of the house had removed all the comfortable sitting areas on the porch where we used to gather. The formal living room with its uncomfortable modern furniture wasn't conducive to the easy conversations we once had. Your friends are always welcome, Jessica would insist when I mentioned it, but her tight smile told them otherwise. I started taking longer walks to the edge of my property, finding solace in the unchanged landscape beyond our fence. Sometimes I'd sit for hours watching the horizon, wondering how my life had become so untethered from everything familiar. One evening I overheard Jessica on the phone, her voice carrying through the thin walls. It's getting worse, she said to someone. Luke is finally seeing it too. We're exploring options. Yes, assisted living might be best. She can't manage here anymore. My heart froze. They were planning to send me away from my home. The home where I'd raised my son, where my husband had taken his last breath, where every floorboard and doorframe held memories that kept me connected to my past. That night, I tried talking to Luke. I waited until Jessica went to take a bath, then knocked gently on his office door. "Do you have a minute?" I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. "What's up, Mom?" He barely looked up from his computer. Are you and Jessica thinking about sending me to a home?" His head snapped up then, eyes wide. "Who told you that?" I overheard Jessica on the phone. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We're just exploring options, Mom. For the future, for when you might need more help than we can provide." "But I don't need help now," I said, my voice small but firm. "The doctor said I'm fine. Let's not talk about this tonight," he said, turning back to his screen. "Jessica has done a lot of research. We can discuss it as a family later." A family. But I was being excluded from decisions about my own life, my own future. Later I heard them arguing in hushed tones. "You shouldn't have mentioned anything yet," Jessica hissed. "I told you I'd handle it when the time was right." The silence that followed was the loudest yet. I was being erased from my own story, one whispered conversation at a time. I found a small radio in a kitchen drawer, one Jessica hadn't yet purged. I kept it in my room, playing it softly to drown out the suffocating silence and my spiraling thoughts. One morning, Jessica appeared in my doorway, unplugging it without asking. "The noise is too much, Agnes." Luke couldn't concentrate on his work calls, but Luke's office was on the opposite side of the house. When I went to retrieve the radio later, it was gone, donated. Jessica explained with a dismissive wave. "You weren't using it anyway." That night, I whispered my husband's name into the darkness, just to hear a voice, even my own in that Tom-like room. "James, they're making me disappear while I'm still breathing. The isolation is building, and this mother's worst fears are coming true." Like and subscribe if you're feeling the injustice. You won't believe what happens next. The day Jessica crossed the final line from subtle manipulation to outright disrespect, I was in my small herb garden, the last corner of the property she hadn't improved. The morning air was sweet with the scent of rosemary and thyme, plants I'd nurtured for decades. Some started from cuttings my own mother had given me. I heard Jessica's voice before I saw her, speaking to someone on the phone as she approached the garden gate. I instinctively remained still, hidden behind the tall lavender bushes. "The realtor says we could list it by next month," she said, her voice animated with excitement. "Once we handle the Agnes situation, of course." The Agnes situation, as if I were a problem to be solved, not a person with feelings, rights, and history. "The property values in this area are skyrocketing," she continued. "We could sell this outdated farmhouse for enough to buy that modern place in the city development, and have money left for renovations." My blood ran cold. They were planning to sell my home, the home that had been in my family for 3 generations. The home where Luke took his first steps, where my husband and I had built our life together. "She'll have to understand it's for the best," Jessica said dismissively. "Besides, the senior community has activities, people her own age. She'll adjust." I stood up then, no longer caring if she knew I'd overheard. Jessica startled, nearly dropping her phone. "I'll call you back," she said quickly, disconnecting. "You're selling my house." My voice was surprisingly steady, despite the earthquake happening inside me. Jessica's face shifted quickly from shock to that practiced look of patronizing concern. "Agnes, you weren't meant to hear that conversation. We wanted to discuss everything properly with you once we had all the information." "This is my home," I said simply. "It's not yours to sell." Her smile tightened. "Actually, when Luke moved back, you added him to the deed, remember? For inheritance purposes." I did remember. A decision made from love and practicality, never imagining it would be used against me. "Luke would never agree to this," I said, grasping at the hope that my son would still choose me, still honor our family's legacy. "It was Luke's idea," Jessica replied, her voice honey-sweet, but her eyes cold. "He's concerned about maintaining such a large property as you continue to decline." The lie was so brazen, so cruel, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. When I finally found my voice, I said, "I want to hear this from Luke." "Of course," she said smoothly. "We'll all sit down tonight and discuss the plans. Luke's been researching senior communities for months. There's a lovely one just 20 minutes from here. Well, from our new place." Our new place. The farmhouse was already gone in her mind. That evening, when Luke came home, I was waiting in the kitchen. Jessica hovered nearby, clearly nervous about what I might say. Mom, Jessica told me you overheard some things that upset you, he began, his tone cautious. Is it true? I asked directly. Are you planning to sell the farm and move me to a facility? It's not a facility, Mom, he corrected, not meeting my eyes. It's a retirement community. With people your age, activities, healthcare on site. This is my home, I said, my voice breaking, despite my best efforts. Your father and I built our life here. You grew up here. Mom, be reasonable, Luke said, his voice hardening. This place is too much for you to manage. You're getting older. We're thinking about your future. My future, I stood up straighter, or your convenience. That's not fair, he snapped, and I saw Jessica place a restraining hand on his arm. Luke, she's upset. Jessica interjected, her voice dripping with fake compassion. We should have prepared her better. Prepared me, like a child being told unpleasant news. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. Jessica's mask slipped then, just for a moment, her eyes narrowed, her mouth twisted into something ugly before she composed herself. Agnes, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Change is difficult for everyone, especially at your age. At my age, I repeated, feeling a new emotion rising beneath my hurt. Anger, pure righteous anger. And what exactly do you know about my age, Jessica? What do you know about tending the same land for 40 years? About the memories in every corner of this house? About respecting your elders, instead of treating them like inconvenient furniture to be discarded when it no longer matches your decor? Luke looked shocked at my outburst. Jessica's face hardened into something cold and calculating. I think you're demonstrating exactly why we're concerned, she said icily. These emotional outbursts aren't healthy. Before I could respond, the kitchen phone rang, an old-fashioned landline I'd insisted on keeping, despite Jessica's objections about it being outdated technology. I answered it with shaking hands. It was Margaret, my oldest friend, calling about our weekly bridge game. We've missed you, Agnes. Are you coming tomorrow? Before I could answer, Jessica snatched the phone from my hand. I'm sorry, Margaret. Agnes won't be joining you anymore. Her doctor has advised against overstimulation. She hung up, turning to me with false sweetness. You know how confused you get after those gatherings. Luke watched this exchange with growing discomfort, but still said nothing. In that moment, I realized how completely she had isolated me. Even my weekly card game, my last social connection, was being severed. If this betrayal makes your blood boil, hit like and subscribe now. The public humiliation this mother endures next will break your heart. The annual Harvest Festival had been a cornerstone of our community for generations. Each September, local families gathered at the town square to celebrate the season's bounty with food, music, and laughter. For 30 years, my apple pie had won first place, a small pride that connected me to my neighbors and friends. This year, despite everything happening at home, I was determined to participate. I spent the morning carefully baking, using the recipe passed down from my grandmother. The familiar motions of peeling apples and rolling dough centered me, a reminder that some things remained unchanged. Jessica seemed unusually supportive, even offering to help transport the pie to the festival. I should have recognized the warning signs in her too bright smile, the way she insisted on carrying the pie herself. But hope, that desperate, foolish hope that things might improve, blinded me. The festival grounds were bustling when we arrived. Old friends called out greetings, neighbors waved. For the first time in months, I felt connected to my community again, visible and valued. Agnes, we missed you at the garden club, Mrs. Henderson called out, coming back this fall. Before I could answer, Jessica linked her arm through mine with a grip just tight enough to be uncomfortable. Agnes has been scaling back her activities, she announced loudly. Haven't you, Agnes? We're focusing on rest and relaxation these days. Several people exchanged glances. I opened my mouth to contradict her, but Jessica was already steering me toward the pie contest table, chattering about how we had worked so hard on our entry. Our entry? I finally managed to ask quietly. Well, I did help you remember all the ingredients, she replied with a wink. You were getting a bit confused this morning. I hadn't been confused. I'd made that pie 100 times. But before I could respond, we reached the judging area. The local news reporter, Sarah Kent, approached with a smile. Mrs. Winters, your famous apple pie again this year. Yes, I began, but Jessica interrupted. We're so excited, she gushed. I've been learning all Agnes's old recipes before she forgets them entirely. This might be her last year competing, so it's extra special. The reporter's expression shifted to one of sympathy. Oh, is everything all right? Just getting older, Jessica said with a theatrical sigh. Memory isn't what it used to be, right, Agnes? All eyes turned to me. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, humiliation burning through me. In that moment, Jessica was rewriting my story in front of the entire community, casting me as feeble, forgetful, diminished. My memory is perfectly fine, I managed. My voice tight. Jessica laughed lightly. Oh, Agnes is having one of her good days today. We're grateful for those, aren't we, honorable? As if we were close, as if she were caring for me out of love, rather than calculating self-interest. The judging began shortly after. When they announced the winners, my pie placed third. The first time in decades, I hadn't won or at least placed second. As I accepted the small ribbon, Mrs. Patterson, the head judge, leaned in. Different this year, she whispered. Not quite your usual standard. I nodded numbly, wondering if the pie had somehow changed, or if the judges, like everyone else, were seeing me differently through the lens Jessica had created. The final humiliation came during the community luncheon. I was seated at a table with friends I'd known for 30 years, when Jessica approached with Luke. Mom, did you take your medication today? Luke asked loudly enough for everyone to hear. I don't take daily medication, I replied, mortified as conversations around us quieted. Jessica placed a hand on my shoulder. Agnes, we talked about this. The doctor prescribed those memory pills last month, remember? There were no memory pills. No such conversation had ever taken place. But the damage was done. Looks of pity surrounded me. Decades of relationships reframed in an instant. She gets confused, Jessica told my friends in a stage whisper. We're handling it, but it's been challenging. I sat frozen, watching my identity being eroded in public, powerless to stop it. My friends' expressions shifted from confusion to concern, their perception of me transforming before my eyes. That evening, I cried alone in my bedroom, the small third-place ribbon clutched in my hand. The tears weren't for the lost competition, but for the public dismantling of my dignity, my autonomy, my place in the community I loved. For the first time, I truly understood the extent of Jessica's campaign against me. This wasn't just about my home or my relationship with Luke. She was systematically erasing me from my house, from my community, and soon, if she had her way, from my son's life entirely. I later discovered what happened to my pie. In the kitchen that morning, while I'd stepped out to answer the phone, Jessica had tampered with it. Adding extra salt, reducing the sugar, she'd sabotaged my signature recipe deliberately. Elaine from next door confirmed it when she visited secretly the following day. I saw her through the window, Agnes, adding something to your mixing bowl when your back was turned. The depth of Jessica's cruelty stunned me. It wasn't enough to isolate me from friends and family. She needed to destroy the small accomplishments that gave me pride and identity. That night, I overheard her telling Luke, maybe it's time your mother stops competing. The disappointment of losing seems to be affecting her emotional stability. The public humiliation cuts deep, but this mother's story is far from over. Like and subscribe to witness her darkest moment and the beginning of her redemption. After the Harvest Festival, something inside me broke. The fight that had sustained me through months of Jessica's manipulations flickered and dimmed like a candle running out of wax. I retreated further into myself, speaking less at meals, spending more time alone in my room. Luke noticed my withdrawal but interpreted it, exactly as Jessica had trained him to, as further evidence of my decline. Mom's barely talking at dinner. I overheard him telling Jessica one evening, "Should we call Dr. Winters again?" "I've already made an appointment," Jessica replied. "I'm also going to contact that senior community, Sunny Pines. We should get her on their waiting list while she still has some good days left." Some good days left. As if my life were already ending, my worth already determined to be less than. The culmination of Jessica's campaign came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was in the attic, the last place in the house that remained untouched by Jessica's improvements, looking through old photo albums. Among the dusty boxes, I found comfort in tangible evidence of my life, proof that my memories were real, that the person I had been still existed somewhere. I didn't hear Jessica come up the stairs. Her voice startled me. "Agnes, what are you doing up here alone?" I turned, clutching an album containing photos from Luke's childhood, just looking at old pictures. Her eyes narrowed, taking in the scattered boxes and open albums. You shouldn't be climbing those steep stairs by yourself, and all this dust isn't good for your lungs. Luke would be worried sick if he knew. I've been coming up here for 40 years, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. I'm perfectly capable of climbing stairs. She stepped closer, reaching for the album in my hands. Let me help you put these away. Then we can go downstairs for some tea. I'm not finished, I said, holding the album tighter. Something shifted in Jessica's expression then, the mask of concern dropping for a moment to reveal the cold calculation beneath. Agnes, don't be difficult. We both know you shouldn't be up here alone. What if you fell? What if you got confused and couldn't find your way down? I'm not confused, I insisted, anger flaring. Stop saying that. Stop making Luke believe I'm losing my mind when I'm not. Oh, Agnes, she sighed dramatically. This defensiveness is exactly what the doctor warned us about. It's part of the condition, the paranoia, the accusations. There is no condition. I stood up too quickly, lightheaded from the sudden movement. I stumbled slightly, reaching for a nearby box to steady myself. Jessica moved with surprising speed, grabbing my arm. But instead of stabilizing me, I felt a subtle push, not enough to send me falling, but enough to unbalance me further. I tumbled backward, my hip hitting the edge of an old trunk before I landed hard on the wooden floor. The pain was immediate and intense. Jessica stood over me, her expression a perfect mask of horror and concern. Agnes, oh my God. She knelt beside me, her voice loud enough to carry downstairs. I told you not to move around so quickly. Help Luke. Luke, call an ambulance. Your mother fell. Through the haze of pain, I saw the calculation in her eyes. This wasn't an accident. This was opportunity. Luke thundered up the stairs, his face pale with panic. Mom, what happened? She was confused, disoriented, Jessica said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. I tried to help her, but she got agitated and lost her balance. That's not true, I gasped through the pain, but my protest was lost in the commotion. The next hours passed in a blur of ambulances, emergency rooms and doctors. The diagnosis, a broken hip. At my age, one of the most devastating injuries possible. Through it all, Jessica played the role of devoted daughter-in-law perfectly, answering doctors' questions before I could, emphasizing my confusion, making decisions about my care as if I weren't present. We've been concerned about her cognitive state for months. I heard her tell the orthopedic surgeon, this fall is exactly what we've been worried might happen. From my hospital bed, I watched Luke's face as he absorbed Jessica's narrative. The worry in his eyes was genuine, but it was worry based on a false story, a story where his mother was failing, where Jessica was the hero trying to help, where the farmhouse was unsafe, and where Sunny Pines retirement community was the only reasonable solution. I knew then that I had lost everything. My home, my independence, my son's trust. As they wheeled me into surgery, I closed my eyes against hot tears, wondering if I would ever find my way back to the truth. In the moments before the anesthesia took hold, a strange clarity washed over me. I managed to catch the young nurse's hand, pulling her closer. Please, I whispered, find my journal in the family Bible at home, back of my closet. Her brow furrowed in confusion, but she nodded. I need a witness, I added urgently as the drugs began to blur my vision. She pushed me. She's been gaslighting me for months. The nurse's eyes widened, and I saw a flash of recognition. Perhaps she had an elderly mother of her own, or had seen this scenario before. I'll check, she promised, squeezing my hand. As darkness claimed me, I clung to that small promise like a lifeline. Someone had finally heard me. Someone might finally believe that I wasn't crazy, confused, or declining. I was simply being erased. This innocent mother has lost everything, but fate has a way of revealing the truth. Hit like and subscribe to see how divine justice begins to unfold in her darkest hour. Recovery from hip surgery was slow and painful. Instead of returning to my beloved farmhouse, I was transferred to a rehabilitation facility. Just until you're strong enough, Luke had explained, not meeting my eyes. But I knew the truth. Jessica was using my injury as the final piece in her plan. My room at home was already being repurposed into Jessica's home office. From my sterile room at Golden Oaks Rehabilitation Center, I watched autumn turn to early winter through a window that didn't open. Physical therapy was grueling, but I threw myself into it with determination. Each painful step with the walker was one step closer to some form of independence, even if my home was lost to me. Luke visited every few days, always with Jessica at his side. She'd arrange flowers, adjust my pillows, and speak to the nurses about my condition, while Luke sat awkwardly, our conversations superficial and strained. The house sold faster than we expected, he mentioned during one visit, studying his hands. The new owners want to move in before Christmas. The news, though expected, felt like a physical blow. So all my things, Jessica's boxed up what you'll need for your apartment at Sunny Pines, he said quickly. The rest we've put in storage, or he trailed off. Or what? I pressed. Or donated, Jessica finished smoothly. You won't have room for all that old furniture, Agnes. Your new place will be cozy but compact. My life reduced to what would fit in a compact apartment. The rest discarded like outdated relics. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. My physical therapist, Diane, mentioned she needed to step out during our session to take an important call. She left her tablet on the chair beside my bed. A notification popped up, an email with the subject line "Farmhouse Renovation Plans." I shouldn't have looked, but something compelled me to reach for the tablet, to tap the notification. The email opened to reveal an exchange between Diane and Jessica. My hands trembled as I read, "Thanks for the referral to Golden Oaks. Agnes is settling in well. The longer she's there, the easier it will be to transition her to permanent care. Luke still feels guilty, but he'll come around once we start renovations. The inheritance money from the farm sale should cover the master suite expansion and the pool you suggested. Once Agnes signs the power of attorney paperwork next week, we'll have full control of her accounts too." I stared at the screen, my worst fears confirmed. This wasn't just about the farmhouse. Jessica was after my savings, the money I'd put aside for my late husband's life insurance, the nest egg meant to care for me in my old age, and eventually pass to Luke. But why was Diane involved? I scrolled up to earlier messages and found my answer. Diane wasn't just my physical therapist, she was Jessica's cousin. Keep her progress slow but show just enough improvement to keep insurance paying. Jessica had written, "We need at least 6 more weeks to get everything transferred and the POA finalized." They were working together to keep me institutionalized, while Jessica seized control of everything I owned. The physical therapy exercises that left me exhausted and in pain, were they designed to help me recover or to ensure I remained dependent? I quickly closed the email and placed the tablet back as I heard Diane returning. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced my face to remain neutral as she continued our session. That night, I lay awake planning my next move. I needed proof, something Luke couldn't dismiss as confusion or paranoia. The email alone wouldn't be enough. Jessica would claim I misunderstood or imagined it. The next morning, I asked the nursing aide for my personal items. Among them was the small notebook Luke had brought from home, where I'd kept addresses and phone numbers. With shaking hands, I found the number for Harold Bennett, my late husband's attorney and our family friend for 30 years. Using the room phone while the floor was quiet during shift change, I called Harold. His familiar gruff voice brought tears to my eyes. "Agnes, good Lord, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for months." "It's a long story, Harold," I said quietly, "but I need your help." As I explained the situation, Harold's silence spoke volumes. When I finished, he cleared his throat. "Agnes, there's something you should know. Jessica came to my office 6 weeks ago, with paperwork she claimed you had signed, transferring your power of attorney to Luke, with Jessica as his proxy." My blood ran cold. I never signed anything. I thought it seemed off. The signature didn't quite match your usual one. I told her I needed to speak with you directly, before processing anything. She said you were unwell and avoiding calls, due to confusion and embarrassment. When I insisted, she and Luke took their business elsewhere. The pieces were falling into place. Jessica's rush to get me to sign new paperwork, her anger when I'd asked to read documents before signing them, her increasing desperation to have me declared incompetent. "Harold," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in months, "I need your help to get me out of here, and to prove what Jessica's been doing. Will you help me?" "Agnes," he replied without hesitation, "I'll be there tomorrow morning." For the first time since my fall, I felt a flicker of hope. Jessica had been careful, calculating and cruel, but she had made one critical mistake. She had underestimated this old farm woman who had weathered far worse storms than her. My night nurse, Sophia, entered as I hung up the phone. She hesitated, then closed the door behind her. "Mrs. Winters," she said softly, "I need to tell you something. That young nurse from the hospital, Emily, she found your journal. She couldn't retrieve it because your daughter-in-law was always there, but she read enough to be concerned." Sophia sat on the edge of my bed. My grandmother went through something similar with my aunt. I recognize the signs in how your daughter-in-law speaks for you, controls your care decisions. She squeezed my hand. Emily and I made copies of your medication records. There are inconsistencies, dosages, that could cause confusion, dizziness. We've been adjusting them to the correct amounts. Tears welled in my eyes at this unexpected alliance. Thank you, I whispered. You have no idea what this means. The truth is beginning to emerge, and this long-suffering mother is finding her strength. Like and subscribe to witness the powerful testimony that changes everything. Harold arrived at Golden Oaks the next morning, bringing with him not just legal expertise, but a dignified air of authority that seemed to part the waters of institutional bureaucracy. He wasn't alone. At his side was a woman I recognized immediately, Veronica Miller, Luke's ex-girlfriend from before Jessica. Seeing them together in my sterile room felt like the first real breath of fresh air I'd had in months. Agnes, Harold said, taking my hand in his, I believe we have a situation that requires immediate attention. He explained that after my call, he'd done some investigating. The law firm that Jessica had taken my paperwork to belonged to her college roommate's husband. The documents they'd filed contained a forged signature, similar enough to mine to pass a casual inspection, but unlikely to hold up under expert analysis. But that's not all, Harold continued. Veronica has some information you need to hear. Veronica stepped forward, her expression a mixture of regret and determination. Mrs. Winters, I should have come forward sooner. I'm sorry it took this long. She sat on the edge of my bed and told a story that confirmed my worst fears while providing the evidence I desperately needed. Jessica and I worked at the same real estate firm before she met Luke, Veronica began. She was always calculating, looking for the big commission, the wealthy client. When we both attended that charity auction where Luke was, she recognized his last name immediately. Winters, I said quietly. Because of the farm. Veronica nodded. She knew the property values in that area were skyrocketing with the new highway extension. She'd been trying to get listings there for months. According to Veronica, Jessica had purposefully pursued Luke after learning about the farm's location and acreage. Their chance meeting at the coffee shop the following week had been engineered. Their entire relationship had been built on Jessica's determination to access the valuable property. She bragged about it at the office Christmas party, after they'd been dating a few months. Veronica continued, said she'd landed a 2-for-1 deal, a husband and a future development property. I confronted her about it, told her Luke deserved better. She threatened to have me fired if I interfered. My heart ached for my son, used as a pawn in Jessica's real estate ambitions. But the pain was mixed with validation. I hadn't imagined her manipulation. It had been real from the very beginning. Why come forward now? I asked. Veronica looked down at her hands. Luke called me last week, asking about property values in the area. He mentioned selling the farm, said it was too much for his mom to manage. It didn't sound like him at all. When I asked about you, he said you were failing rapidly and needed full-time care. She'd known that didn't sound right. The Agnes Winters she remembered had been vibrant, sharp-minded, fiercely independent. I knew something was wrong, she concluded. Then yesterday, Harold contacted me. The pieces fell into place. Harold took over, explaining our next steps. He had already filed for an emergency hearing regarding the suspicious power of attorney. He'd arranged for a court-appointed physician to conduct an independent evaluation of my cognitive status. And most importantly, he brought paperwork to have me released from Golden Oaks into his temporary care. Jessica can't know what we're doing, I cautioned. If she suspects I'm fighting back, there's no telling what she might do. She won't know, Harold assured me. As far as she's concerned, you're being transferred to another facility for specialized therapy. By the time she discovers otherwise, we'll have everything in place for the hearing. As Harold and Veronica helped me pack the few belongings I had at Golden Oaks, I felt strength returning to my spirit. The fog of helplessness that had surrounded me for months was lifting. There's one more thing, Veronica said as she folded my sweater. I saved the text messages Jessica sent me back when she was pursuing Luke. Messages where she explicitly talks about her plans for the farm. Would those help? Harold's eyebrows shot up. They most certainly would. Direct evidence of intent is exactly what we need. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to smile, not the placating smile I'd worn to appease Luke and Jessica, but a genuine expression of hope. Let's go home, I said, rising carefully with my walker. Not to the farmhouse, that was gone now, but away from the prison Jessica had created for me. Away from the fog of doubt and gaslighting, toward truth, toward justice. As Harold helped me into his car, I gazed back at Golden Oaks one last time. Jessica had taken almost everything from me. My home, my dignity, nearly my son. But she had made a critical miscalculation. She had forgotten that farm women are made of stronger stuff than city schemers could ever understand. Just as we were leaving, Nurse Sophia rushed out with a manila envelope. "Wait," she called, breathless. "This is for your case." Inside were copies of my medical records, including documentation of medication changes that occurred only when Jessica visited, pharmacy records showing prescriptions I'd never been told about, and a statement from Emily, the hospital nurse. "Jessica asked about your mother's anesthesia recovery," Emily had written, specifically if it might cause memory issues or confusion. When I said it could temporarily, she seemed pleased rather than concerned. The final item was my journal, which Sophia had secretly retrieved during a rare moment when Jessica left my room unattended. "Your neighbor Elaine helped," Sophia explained. "She created a distraction so Jessica would leave." My meticulous documentation of Jessica's gaslighting dates, times, incidents, would now serve as critical evidence. Another woman fighting for me, another ally I never expected. The pieces are coming together, and justice is on the horizon. Like and subscribe to witness the dramatic confrontation that changes everything. 3 weeks after leaving Golden Oaks, I sat in the county courthouse, my back straight despite the lingering pain in my hip. Harold had arranged everything meticulously: the hearing date, the evidence presentation, even my outfit, a simple but dignified blue dress that reminded everyone I was a person of substance, not a confused old woman to be discarded. Jessica and Luke sat across the aisle, her expression a careful mask of concern, his confusion evident. They hadn't known about the hearing until the formal notice arrived 2 days ago. Jessica had tried calling Harold repeatedly, leaving increasingly frantic messages about poor Agnes's confusion and family matters that don't require legal intervention. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s named Judge Marilyn Watkins, called the court to order. "This is an unusual case," she began. "We're here to determine if a power of attorney document was executed fraudulently, and to address allegations of elder abuse and undue influence." Jessica leaned over to whisper something to their attorney, her composure slipping slightly. Luke just stared at me, confusion and hurt in his eyes. I wanted to go to him, to tell him everything would be okay, that I understood he'd been manipulated too, but that would have to wait. Harold presented our case methodically, laying out the timeline of events since Jessica had entered our lives. The court-appointed physician testified that I showed no signs of cognitive impairment, describing me as remarkably sharp and articulate for any age. The handwriting expert confirmed that the signature on the power of attorney document was not mine but a reasonably skillful forgery. Then came the most damning evidence. Veronica took the stand, composed and clear. She described Jessica's calculated pursuit of Luke, her explicit statements about wanting the farm property, her plans to deal with the old lady once they were married. "I have text messages from Jessica confirming these intentions," Veronica stated, as Harold presented the printed messages to the court. From where I sat, I could see the color draining from Jessica's face. But the true breaking point came when Harold called his final witness, Diane, the physical therapist from Golden Oaks. Faced with potential charges of medical fraud and conspiracy, Diane had agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. She confirmed everything: the deliberate slowdown of my therapy, the coordination with Jessica to keep me dependent, the plans to drain my accounts once the power of attorney was secured. Jessica told me no one would believe Agnes over her. Diane testified, avoiding my eyes. She said old people make things up all the time and everyone knows it. Throughout the testimony, I watched Luke. I saw disbelief turn to confusion, then to horror, and finally to a devastating realization as the full extent of Jessica's manipulation became clear. When it was Jessica's turn to testify, her carefully constructed persona crumbled under the weight of the evidence. She attempted to maintain the fiction that she'd only been concerned for my welfare, that Luke had initiated the plans to sell the farm, that she'd never intended to control my finances. But Judge Watkins wasn't having it. "Mrs. Patterson," the judge interrupted, using Jessica's maiden name pointedly, "these text messages explicitly state, and I quote, 'Once we're married, the farm is as good as mine. The old lady won't know what hit her.' Would you care to explain that?" Jessica's composure finally broke. "That farm is worth millions with the new highway," She was going to waste it, let it sit there growing vegetables when it could be developed. Why should some old woman who can barely remember her own name control that kind of asset? A gasp went through the courtroom. Even Jessica's attorney winced. Luke stood up abruptly. That old woman is my mother, he said, his voice breaking, and she has never once forgotten my name. The judge's ruling was unequivocal. The power of attorney was invalidated. All my financial accounts were to be returned to my sole control. A restraining order was issued preventing Jessica from contacting me, and the judge recommended to the district attorney that criminal charges for fraud, elder abuse, and forgery be pursued. But the legal victory, satisfying as it was, paled in comparison to what happened after the hearing adjourned. Luke approached me slowly, his face ravaged by guilt and grief. "Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Can you ever forgive me?" I opened my arms to him. "My boy, my only child." "There's nothing to forgive," I said as he knelt beside my chair. "She fooled us both." As Luke sobbed against my shoulder, I looked past him to where Jessica stood alone, abandoned even by her attorney. Our eyes met across the courtroom. For once there was no mask, no pretense, just raw, undisguised rage and defeat. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The truth had spoken for itself, louder and more definitively than any gloating ever could. Nurse Emily approached after the verdict, still in her hospital scrubs. She'd come straight from her shift. "I've been caring for elderly patients for 15 years, she told me, and I've seen this pattern before. People like Jessica prey on the vulnerable, counting on society's willingness to dismiss older voices." She handed me a business card for an elder advocacy group. "Would you consider speaking at our awareness workshop? Your story could help others recognize the warning signs." Across the courtroom, I noticed my neighbors, Elaine Margaret from Bridge Club, Mrs. Henderson from the Garden Society, all smiling, some wiping away tears. They had come to support me, despite Jessica's efforts to isolate me. Judge Watkins approached before leaving the bench. "Mrs. Winters," she said quietly, "my own mother experienced something similar with a caregiver. Your courage today will protect countless others. Justice has been served, but the story isn't over." Like and subscribe to see the aftermath of this powerful revelation and how this strong mother rebuilds her life. The weeks following the courthouse revelation unfolded with a momentum all their own. Jessica's carefully constructed world collapsed like a house built on sand, meeting the incoming tide. The district attorney did indeed press charges, adding attempted real estate fraud to the list after investigating the suspicious circumstances surrounding the sale of my farm. The sale itself was halted pending criminal proceedings, the property placed in legal limbo. Luke filed for divorce immediately. The prenuptial agreement Jessica had ironically insisted upon, designed to protect her assets, not his, now worked against her, leaving her with nothing from their brief marriage. She moved out of the small apartment they had been renting while preparing my farm for sale, taking only her personal belongings. I stayed with Harold and his wife temporarily, regaining my strength, and working with a legitimate physical therapist who marveled at how quickly I progressed once properly treated. "You were never as incapacitated as your records from Golden Oaks indicated," she told me during one session. "Someone was deliberately extending your recovery time." The most painful process was rebuilding my relationship with Luke. The guilt he carried threatened to crush him. He could barely look at me during his initial visits, shame radiating from him in palpable waves. "I should have seen through her," he said again and again. "I should have believed you. I should have protected you." "She was very convincing," I reminded him gently. "She fooled everyone, doctors, neighbors, even Harold initially. But I'm your son," he insisted, anguish in his voice. "I should have known better. Healing takes time, both for broken hips and broken trust." But we began the journey together, one conversation at a time. The community rallied around us in ways that restored my faith in human connection. Mrs. Henderson from the garden club brought cuttings from my herb garden that she had borrowed before the farm sale, preserving plants that had been in my family for generations. My old neighbors recovered some of my donated furniture from local thrift shops. Friends saved photographs and keepsakes they had been gifted by Jessica during her clearing of the house. One afternoon, Luke arrived at Harold's home with a familiar wooden box. "Your recipe cards," he said, placing it reverently in my hands. "I found them in Jessica's storage unit. She kept them. I think she was planning to publish them as her own family recipes someday." The box contained generations of my family's history, handwritten cards with notes in the margins, food stains marking favorite dishes, memories captured in ingredient lists and cooking times. I traced my mother's handwriting with a trembling finger, overwhelmed by the recovery of this piece of my heritage. Jessica's fall from grace was swift and complete. Her real estate license was suspended pending the outcome of her criminal case. Former colleagues distanced themselves. Her carefully cultivated social media image of successful realtor and devoted wife crumbling under the weight of courthouse records and community gossip. I took no pleasure in her downfall. The damage she had caused, to me, to Luke, to our relationship, to our home, could never be fully repaired. Her punishment would not restore what was lost, but it would prevent her from doing the same to another vulnerable person, another family. One rainy afternoon, as Luke and I were discussing options for housing, the farm still tied up in legal proceedings, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. Mrs. Winters, a familiar voice said, "It's Jessica." My hand tightened on the phone. "I believe there's a restraining order preventing this call." "Please," she said, her voice lacking its usual polish. "Just 1 minute." Against my better judgment, I listened. "I'm facing significant jail time," she said flatly. "My attorney says my only chance at leniency is to make amends, to express remorse." "And are you remorseful?" I asked. The pause told me everything. "I'm sorry I got caught," she finally admitted, a hint of her true self emerging. "But you have to understand, that property, that location, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Anyone in real estate would have done the same." "No, Jessica," I replied calmly. "They wouldn't have. Most people have something you lack. A conscience." Her bitter laugh crackled through the phone. "A conscience doesn't pay the bills, Agnes. A conscience doesn't build a future. Neither does a prison cell," I responded. Then, feeling a surge of compassion that surprised even me, I added, "I hope you find whatever is missing in you, Jessica. I truly do. Life is too short for such emptiness." I hung up, not waiting for her response. There was nothing more to say. That evening, as Luke and I shared dinner with Harold and his wife, I realized something profound had shifted within me. The anger that had fueled me through the court proceedings had faded, replaced by something quieter but more enduring: peace. Jessica had taken much from me, but she hadn't taken everything, and what remained: my relationship with my son, my sense of self, my capacity for joy. These were the true treasures no scheme could ever steal. "To new beginnings," Harold toasted, raising his glass. "And to lessons learned," I added, meeting my son's eyes across the table with love and forgiveness. We discovered later that Jessica had tried similar schemes before. 2 other elderly property owners had fallen victim to her manipulations, though on a smaller scale. When news of my case broke, they came forward with their stories. The pattern was identical. She'd ingratiate herself as a helpful assistant, gradually take control of finances, and eventually acquire valuable property through dubious means. In both cases, the victims had been too ashamed or confused to seek help. "You're the first one who fought back," Detective Miller told me. "Because of you, we can build a pattern of behavior that will strengthen all 3 cases." The elder advocacy group asked if I would record a short video about recognizing the signs of financial exploitation. "When it comes from someone you trust, a caregiver, a family member, or someone who seems to care, the manipulation is harder to identify," I explained to the camera. "But trust your instincts. You've survived decades by knowing when something feels wrong." The healing has begun, but there's one final chapter to this mother's journey. Like and subscribe for the powerful conclusion that will touch your heart. 1 year has passed since the courthouse confrontation that changed everything. So much has happened, both painful and healing, that sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. The criminal case against Jessica concluded with a guilty plea to multiple charges. She received a 5-year sentence, though she'll likely serve less. The farm sale was completely invalidated, the property returned to my ownership. The money Jessica had collected from the buyers is still being untangled in civil court, but that's not my concern anymore. Luke and I made a decision that surprised many but felt absolutely right to us. We moved back to the farm together. Not to the main house that held too many painful memories of Jessica's manipulation, but to the charming guest cottage on the eastern edge of the property. Luke renovated it himself, making it accessible for my still healing hip, while preserving its rustic charm. The main farmhouse we donated to the County Historical Society to be preserved as an educational center where children can learn about traditional farming practices. The land itself we placed in a conservation trust, ensuring it will never be developed, never be carved up into the luxury condos Jessica had envisioned. It will remain as it has been for generations, a place of growth, of natural beauty, of heritage. Luke has found healing in physical labor, in reconnecting with the land he grew up on. I've found comfort in sharing my knowledge with young people who visit the farm, teaching them to identify herbs, to understand the rhythms of planting and harvesting, to respect the wisdom of traditional practices. Last month, something unexpected happened. Veronica came to visit, bringing seedlings for our new kitchen garden. She and Luke talked for hours on the porch, their conversation flowing easily, punctuated by laughter I hadn't heard from my son in years. She's been back several times since. I make myself scarce during these visits, smiling at the possibility of new beginnings. This morning, as I sat on the porch watching the sunrise paint the fields gold, I reflected on everything that happened. The pain Jessica caused was real and deep. The betrayal by my own son cut to my very core. The loss of my home, my dignity, my voice, these were wounds that left permanent scars. Yet here I am, watching another day dawn on the land my family has tended for generations. Different circumstances, different dwelling, but the same resilient spirit that has always sustained us. If there's wisdom I've gained from this journey, it's this: truth may be obscured, manipulated or denied, but it cannot be permanently extinguished. Like a seed buried beneath winter soil, it waits patiently for the right conditions to emerge, to grow, to flourish. I also learned that a mother's love is both stronger and more fragile than I ever realized. Stronger in its capacity to forgive, to rebuild, to hope again. More fragile in how easily it can be wounded by the very ones it seeks to protect. To those who might be facing their own Jessica, that person who makes you question your reality, your worth, your very sanity, I offer this: trust yourself. Your lived experience matters. Your instincts have value, and no matter how isolated you feel, you are not alone. The most powerful weapon against manipulation is truth spoken clearly, consistently, and without shame. Had I remained silent, had I accepted the narrative Jessica created about me, I would have lost everything, not just my property, but my sense of self, my connection to my son, my place in the world. Sometimes the greatest act of love is standing firm in your truth, even when those you love cannot yet see it. Luke joins me now on the porch, 2 steaming cups of coffee in his hands. His smile holds traces of the boy he was, and the man he's become, wiser, humbled, more compassionate for having faced his own fallibility. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" he asks, settling into the chair beside mine. "Just counting blessings," I reply, accepting the coffee with a smile. And they are countless indeed. The most unexpected blessing came 6 months ago, a letter from an elderly woman in Arizona. "I saw your interview about elder exploitation," she wrote. "It gave me courage to speak up about my own situation." She'd been gradually isolated by her nephew, who had been siphoning money from her accounts. Because of my story, she contacted authorities before losing everything. Since then, dozens of similar letters have arrived. The Elder Advocacy Center created a support group that meets monthly in our farmhouse kitchen. We call ourselves the Resilience. Each member has survived some form of manipulation or abuse. Each carries wisdom earned through pain. Peña que so sobro, is so pravos. Too bad this is all that's left for you, Jessica had sneered when showing me the tiny corner of the attic where she'd relegated my possessions. How wrong she had been. What's left for me is everything that matters: dignity, community, purpose, and the knowledge that my story has become a lantern guiding others out of darkness. As Luke would say, that's a harvest worth celebrating. Have you ever had to stand up for your truth when no one believed you? Share your story in the comments below. And if this mother's journey touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share to help others who might be facing their own battles against manipulation and deceit.